Good evening. Welcome to Capitol Report on NTD. I'm Alina Weisskopf filling in for Steve Lance. Here's what we have for you tonight. The White House pushing back as Democratic officials in Illinois and Oregon intensify efforts to block President Trump's National Guard deployments, and what the president tells NTD amid a surge in attacks on ICE agents across the country. City property is now off limits to ICE in Chicago, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says some federal agents have bounties on them. The government shutdown heads into a second week with no deal in sight. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries challenges Speaker Mike Johnson to a debate, while the White House warns that the country is losing about $15 billion a week. Talks between Israel and Hamas begin in Egypt. As the two sides continue fighting, what will it take to carry out Trump's 20-point plan? We'll hear from retired U.S. Air Force Major Glenn Ignazio and Middle East policy analyst Daniel Flesch. And on our panel tonight, the Supreme Court takes up a number of challenges to President Trump's actions, including his reciprocal tariffs and firing a Fed governor. What are the implications for executive authority? We'll discuss with Democratic strategist Mally Smith and former Republican Representative Bob McEwen.
This is Capitol Report, live from our global headquarters in our nation's capital. Here's Steve Lance.
President Trump defending his deployment of National Guard troops to Chicago and Portland as a legal battle unfolds. He tells NTD attacks on ICE officers are part of a criminal insurrection and will face severe consequences. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us the update.
And President Trump told NTD on Monday that he believes that the rampant attacks on ICE agents in cities like Chicago are part of a criminal insurrection and that these attackers will be severely punished. He also defends his deployment of National Guard troops to cities like Chicago and Portland, saying that he has no choice but to save these cities. Secretary Noem saying that some of these attackers are actually organized and they're planning to kill and ambush these officers. What are the consequences for these?
Very severe. We're going to have very severe. We're going to find out who's going after our federal agents, whether it's National Guard or the military or anybody. I mean, if women raped and beaten and knocked to hell, and the same with men where they're being shot all over the place in large numbers, it's going to be lost if you don't do it. We have no choice but to do this.
A legal showdown is unfolding as Democratic officials in Oregon and Illinois today sued the Trump administration over its order to deploy National Guard troops to their cities. A judge on Sunday blocked the administration's deployment of National Guard troops from other states to Portland. But the administration has filed an emergency appeal seeking to proceed with the deployment and insisting that the president does have the authority to send the troops in. And meanwhile, as we're seeing a surge in attacks on ICE, including a shooting in Dallas targeting an ICE facility, as well as just this past weekend in Chicago, where 10 cars were zoning in on ICE agents and another car was trying to ram into an ICE vehicle. A White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller told NTD today that he believes such attacks are part of organized domestic terrorism.
To what extent does the administration believe that such attacks are organized?
Yeah, as I've said repeatedly, this is organized domestic terrorism. So when you have a 10-car ramming attack with armed attackers clearly intending to murder ICE officers in the conduct of their duties, what else can you call that?
And President Trump says he will invoke the Insurrection Act if judges and local officials continue holding up and impeding administration's efforts in making these cities safe. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Chicago mayor creates ICE-free zones with a new executive order. It effectively bars federal immigration agents from operating on any city-owned property. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more on that.
City property and unwilling private businesses will no longer serve as staging grounds for these raids.
Any city property in Chicago is now considered an ICE-free zone, according to an executive order signed by Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson.
Our libraries are not for ICE to prepare for a raid. Our parks are not for ICE to set up checkpoints. They are for Chicagoans to play and enjoy. Private establishments can partner with us to make it clear that private property is private property, and ICE cannot enter establishments without a valid warrant.
The Trump administration responded to Mayor Johnson's move, calling it a, quote, betrayal of law-abiding citizens, and it's, quote, shielding the most depraved, violent criminal, illegal aliens from justice. And Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem told Fox and Friends on Sunday that certain federal agents and officers have bounties on them.
They've released their pictures, they've sent them between their networks, and it's an extremely dangerous situation. This isn't just about, protesting free speech or that they don't like that people out here are upholding the law of our country. They're actually going out there and saying, kill these people and we'll give you this much money to do it.
And one independent journalist who's been covering the activity outside of an ICE facility in Portland said that she was given a rather disturbing so-called gift. She said that, quote, a young man in black approached me with this and asked me to wear it. It's a black button that appears to be from Antifa that has her nickname on it with an expletive and shows someone throwing a punch, knocking a person into the air. The White House has been condemning the consistent reports of threats and violence happening outside of the ICE facility in Portland.
For more than 100 days, night after night after night, the ICE facility has been really under siege by these anarchists outside. They have been disrespecting law enforcement. They've been inciting violence. We saw, again, a guillotine rolled out in front of this federal building.
Jason Blair, NTD News.
The government has been shut down for 6 days now. The Senate attempted once again this afternoon to vote on a Democratic and Republican proposal to reopen the government. Both were rejected again. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez joins us live from the Capitol now. Luis, hi, good evening. What's the latest on the government funding battle?
Well, Melina, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, the Senate ended votings for the day, and they voted again for the 5th time on both the Democratic and Republican proposal to reopen government. Both were rejected. Earlier today, we also heard from National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, and he explained to the American people that this shutdown is costing $15 billion of the GDP of the United States every week. We also know that about 750,000 federal employees have been furloughed, and many more are working without pay. That's active duty military personnel, Border Patrol, TSA agents, and FAA air traffic controllers. So both parties are dug in their respective positions, and we still have a shutdown, Melina.
Luis, you've been speaking with senators throughout all of this. What are they telling you? Do they see a pathway forward?
Well, I spoke with both Republicans and Democratic senators today. Republicans believe that they are responsible for reopening government and have thus put forth a proposal that has no partisan policy priorities included. That is their clean continuing resolution, which extends current levels of funding, which were set during the Biden administration by a Democratic-controlled Congress. Democrats insist that they need to have their policy priorities addressed in order to help reopen government. Let's listen to what they had to say.
Do you think that House Republicans should have passed the CR with some partisan policy priorities to then negotiate with Democrats towards a middle point to a clean CR?
Yeah, no, I don't, because when President Biden was president and the House and the Senate were under control of Democrats, they sponsored a clean CR, and we, Republicans, supported it, both on cloture and on final votes. So we're just asking them to do the same thing that Republicans repeatedly did when the shoe was on the other foot.
What is your reaction to Republicans' argument that they've already conceded enough by agreeing to a continuing resolution with Biden-era? So they passed a continuing resolution with Biden-era levels of funding, and some of them are arguing that that is a concession that Democrats should meet them halfway through.
Right. So Republicans control Congress. They're saying that they made a concession by keeping the government open. I don't see what the concession there is at all. given that their single biggest legislative priority this year has been passing a Republican-only bill that put $150 billion into funding deportation.
Senator, with the Republican messaging strategy, what is your reaction to Democrats saying that Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House, and that this is a Republican shutdown?
Well, just a civics refresher course, you need 60 votes to overcome the filibuster. And so the Democrats, now they're on record about blowing that up. But the Republicans happen to believe that we have a responsibility here. So you need 60 votes. And quite frankly, we only need 5 more Democrats. And my guess is that we'll get there with 5 Democrats who are maybe retiring or at least have some semblance of sanity remaining, as opposed to the ones who are throwing the bombs right now and want to have a shutdown.
And do you think the Republican messaging strategy is getting to the American people and they understand that it's a Democrat shutdown?
Yeah, I mean, look, you need 8 Democrat votes to get there. And we don't have them yet, and they've chosen as their priority to fund health care for illegal immigrants.
So, Melina, there we have Senator Eric Schmidt saying that they only need 8 Democrats to join in. They already have 3. That's Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Angus King, and Senator John Fetterman. And according to Senator Schmidt, he thinks that the likely Democrats that would flip would be the ones that are retiring. That would be Senator Gary Peters, Tina Smith, Dick Durbin, and of course also it's important to consider potentially Senator John Ossoff from Georgia, which is the most embattled Democrat that is seeking re-election next year. So Senate Republican strategy will be to continue to put these bills for a vote on the Senate floor until enough Democrats join in with the Republican continuing resolution and reopen government. Back to you, Melina.
All right, thanks, Luis, for those updates. We'll be watching closely to see if those Democrats are able to flip and how long the shutdown lasts this time. Thank you. New developments around at Paramount. The media company has acquired the Free Press and installed its new founder, Barry Weiss, as the editor-in-chief of CBS News. CEO David Ellison welcomed Weiss to the organization. In a press release, he wrote, "I'm confident her entrepreneurial drive and editorial vision will invigorate CBS News." Weiss founded the Free Press in 2021 after resigning from the New York Times in 2020. In her resignation letter, Weiss cited discrimination in a hostile work environment. The journalist also criticized the paper's editorial policies. Weiss wrote that at the time, quote, "stories are chosen and told in a way to satisfy the narrowest of audiences rather than to allow a curious public to read about the world and then draw their own conclusions." In a statement today, Weiss called the new agreement a testament to the vision of Paramount's new leaders. And the Supreme Court returns to the bench today to hear arguments on 2 procedural cases, one that could impact the right to counsel. But what more compelling issues can we expect in the days and weeks ahead? NTD's Arlene Richards previews this year's Supreme Court term.
Following a busy summer, the Supreme Court returned to the bench on Monday for the start of the 2025-2026 term. This term, the court will decide major cases affecting women's sports, presidential power, voting rights, and more. On Monday, the court heard a pair of cases involving the Sixth Amendment right to counsel and whether state procedures can be applied to federal courts. Perhaps the most anticipated case is President Trump's tariffs. The court will hear 2 consolidated cases that challenge the president's power to impose sweeping global tariffs. President Trump invoked an emergency powers law to impose reciprocal tariffs on almost all countries, as well as levies on Canada, Mexico, and China over the trafficking of fentanyl into the United States. The challengers are a group of small businesses in 12 states who all claim that the president doesn't have the independent power to impose tariffs under the law, and that Congress didn't delegate that power under the emergency statute he's relying on. The lower courts agreed and ruled that Trump exceeded his authority. Legal scholar Professor Chad Scuteri said the law does empower the president to impose the challenged tariffs.
Since the founding, tariffs have been a traditional and well-known means of regulating foreign commerce, so the ordinary reading of the statutory phrase regulate importation encompasses the traditional power to regulate importation via tariffs.
He said the law allows the president to either investigate importation or prohibit importation. Here, he said Trump used his authority to regulate importation, which is in the middle of those 2 powers. The Supreme Court will hear arguments on November 5th. Several plaintiffs have challenged the president's power to remove officials from office. Lower courts have relied on a 90-year-old case to rule that Congress can set limits on the president's ability to remove certain officials. The justices have ruled on some emergency appeals, but they haven't issued a final ruling on how far Congress can go in limiting the president's removal power. Several states have created laws to ban transgender girls from participating in girls' sports. Two of those states, Idaho and West Virginia, are expected to appear before the Supreme Court this term to defend the legality of their policies. And the state of Louisiana will be back in court for another round in a fight over redistricting. The High Court previously declined to rule on whether the state's congressional map discriminated against a racial minority. The case will be heard on October 15th. Other cases scheduled for this term include lower court defiance, LGBT conversion therapy for minors, and a state's gun restriction law. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And as the High Court kicks off its new 9-month term, the justices have also turned away multiple cases, like declining to hear a case about a Missouri gun law. The state wants to revive a law to prevent enforcement of several federal gun laws in the state. The 2021 law, backed by Republicans, declared that certain federal gun restrictions violate the Second Amendment. The Biden Justice Department challenged the law, and it was blocked in 2023. Then the Trump Justice Department urged the Supreme Court to decline to hear the case, although it no longer wants to fully bar its enforcement. In a separate case, the Supreme Court declined to hear Ghislaine Maxwell's bid to overturn her conviction in the Jeffrey Epstein trafficking case. The justices also tossed out other appeals by Russia's largest bank, Europe's largest software maker, as well as Live Nation. And coming up next, the Trump administration is cracking down on crime in Portland and Chicago, while Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson declares city spaces as ICE-free zones. He encourages private citizens to do the same. What message does this send? We'll have on Democrat strategist Mally Smith and former Republican Representative Bob McEwen to discuss after the break.